considering YouTube's situation. Just give me 1 second here. Go live, yes. Okay, we are live, if I am correct. It's actually frozen on my screen. We're lagging a little bit, so I apologize in advance for that. But if there are any technical difficulties on your side, please tell me in the chats, because it is going from freeze frame to freeze frame on my screen. So if that's the case on your screen, please tell me, because I definitely don't want that to be the case. That would be bad. Assuming that's not the case, however, we're just going to go ahead and get right into it. So, hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Terrier Talk. This is the special episode that has been brought up and advertised for the past few weeks on the show. This is me going through my entire March Madness bracket with a few interesting side notes along the way, including, of course, how LSU is going to do, as well as my thoughts on Cinderella. So, bring that up. It is freeze frame to freeze frame? Okay. So, okay. That is not good. Let me see if I can fix that. Okay. So, excuse me for awaiting these technical difficulties. Just give me a second. Do I just not have the graphics card for it? That might be the problem. It says it's running at 30 FPS. I don't know why this is happening. I apologize for people watching the stream. This is technical difficulty, trying to get it fixed if I can. Is this better? No. Doesn't look like it. It's just lagging the whole time. There's nothing... It says there's no drop frames, but that's obviously not the case. There is something happening that is not being told for me right this second, and that is a problem. Bear with me, I'm sorry. I'm working with new technology trying to get this to work, and this obviously isn't working very well. Might have to go ahead and go offline just to... Yeah, okay. I'm gonna sign off. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes to try to fix this. I apologize. Just stay tight, and I'll be right back. Wait, it's fixed? It doesn't look fixed. It doesn't... It's looking okay? Okay, it's looking okay. It doesn't look good on my screen, but we're just gonna go ahead and roll. with that being said, okay, so, technical difficulties, at least for now, subverted. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Terrier Talk. This is my special episode, the March Madness preview. I'm going to go through every single game, and go through my bracket, go through my picks. So, with that being said, what you have on your screen right now, outside of the little graphics and my own face, is my, a blank bracket. So, I'm going to show pick by pick my bracket in just a second, but this just shows every single game, all 67 games, and what exactly we're going through right this second, and what the situation is with March Madness. The way I like to do my own March Madness bracket is I like to frame it off of history, because that's really the only thing that March Madness you can go off of. Statistical analysis, as much as I love March Madness, as much as the numbers are important, it's not the most important thing. The most important thing is that history that you can look off of. And I'm going to be bringing that up a lot throughout this video. And one thing to keep in consideration is that as much as you're going to want to look at your bracket and try to be perfect, you have a 1 in absolutely absurd number chance, 2 to the 67th power, with the new extra 4 games, to actually get that perfect bracket. So just going into it, with all these 68 teams, you're not going to get it right. You're not going to get all 67 games right, so I'm going to go through my bracket to try to show as many games, try to show my thoughts on getting as many games perfect as possible. So, with that being said, we're going to go round by round, and I'm going to start in the East. It's the East, right? I'm not going crazy, right? I'm pretty sure it's, what, East, West? I apologize. Yeah, East, West, South, Midwest. So we're going to start in the East, and just quickly going through the teams in the East, we have 1 seed Duke, 16 seed NC Central / North Dakota State, 8 seed VCU, 9 seed UCF, Mississippi State, Liberty, Virginia Tech, St. Louis, Maryland, the winner of the Belmont Temple game, LSU and Yale, Louisville, and Minnesota, Michigan State, and Bradley. Okay, so I'm going to go first round for all the brackets, and then go on from there. So, Duke, to begin with, is the best team going into this. No one is going to be surprised by me saying that, and I think it's just very true. Even with Zion Williamson getting injured and coming back, it's still the strongest team. They're the number 1 overall seed for a reason, and with this first game, despite what last year may tell you, don't get too cute with the number 1 seed versus 16 seed games. It is not the point in time to try to pick, oh, UMBC is going to beat Virginia, like what happened last year. The thing is, about a statistical outlier like UMBC beating Virginia, it leads to more people picking the same thing happening in the next year, and that same thing happening being much less likely. What does this mean? It means that, yes, a 16 seed beat a 1 seed. People are going to be much more likely, because that happened, to pick 16 seeds in the future. But now that it's happened for the first time, it's going to be a very, very long time, statistically speaking, before it happens a second time. Which means, this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but for all of the 1 seeds, this is a, it's going to be a win for the 1 seeds in that first round, my prediction, at the very least. Moving on, VCU versus UCF. This is a very even matchup. UCF, I favor just a tad bit in this game, just because they play in a little bit of a stronger conference. They have a little bit of a stronger strength of schedule. I'm going to go ahead and favor them. Mississippi State versus Liberty. This brings me to one of those points that I want to talk about, and that is probably the most famous term that derives from March Madness, and that is the thought of a Cinderella pick. And I kind of want to explain what exactly Cinderella is. So I did, I guess, a little bit of backstory. So I did a live stream last year at this time with my father, going through my March Madness bracket. It was not on my YouTube channel, it was on Facebook, and a question that was asked during it, and I guess while I'm talking about this, Please, if you have any questions, just ask. At any point in time, just ask any question, and I am, of course, willing to answer it. Interaction is encouraged, of course. Please talk in the comment section, talk in the live chat, and I am willing to discuss with you my picks, things like that. Any questions? So, the question that I was asked was, is there any formula for that coveted term of Cinderella? And the answer I gave then was any double-digit seed making it to the Sweet 16. And while that's true, it doesn't exactly encapsulate all of what a Cinderella can be. So the way I want to explain it now is a little bit more complicated, but I'll try to break it down as much as I can. So you have specific number of seeds, and they're expected to go however many rounds. Like the 9 seed through the 16 seed is expected to lose in the first round. The 5 through 8 is expected to lose in the second round. 3 and 4 in the third. The 2s in the fourth, the Elite 8, and then the final 4 are the 1 seeds. If you have one of those teams winning in that round, a 9 through 16 seed in the first round, so on and so forth, that's considered an upset. If that same team then proceeds to win 2 rounds, a 9 seed or a double-digit seed, making it to the Sweet 16, that would be a Cinderella story. That is... And that doesn't go just for that example, though. Obviously, the double-digit seeds would be an example, but I would also classify a 5 through 8 seed that should be losing in the second round to a top 4 seed, not just making it to the Sweet 16, but even making it to the Elite 8 as a Cinderella. I would consider a non-1 or 2 seed making it to the Final 4. It wouldn't really be considered a Cinderella, even though I would technically call it that. It would more just be the underdog of the Final 4. And then, of course, whoever the higher numbered seed, lower favored seed in the championship game would be the underdog. So I think that's a better term for a Cinderella to define it. And there's always at least one, and there are usually a few every year. And one of those I'm going to call for this year is going to be Liberty. So Liberty's a very interesting team. They're dynamic, and the teams that they are facing in those first 2 rounds are also very dynamic. So what does that mean in terms of a Cinderella? It means that they might just get blown out by Mississippi State in this first round, or they might make a run. Mississippi State is not the most consistent team in the world. They've had bad losses, they've had good wins. And Virginia Tech is very much the same way. So I am going to go ahead and actually make the upset prediction and pick Liberty in this game. It also goes back, this pick specifically, goes to a famous upset in the first round of March Madness. Probably the most famous seeding upset, and most common seeding upset you'll see, and that is the 5 versus the 12 seed. The 12 seed has won the majority of the games in the past few years, and it's closer, that record between the 5 seeds and the 12 seeds in that first round is a lot closer than you would expect. It's not that far away from 500 for the 5 seeds. So I like to pick 2 12 seeds and 2 5 seeds in all of my brackets of all time, and I tend to have a good bit of success with those 5-12 games. And so for this one, Liberty is going to be one of the 2 12 seeds I pick to win their first round game. However, I'm not going to say the same thing for Virginia Tech in that first round going up against St. Louis. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the bottom half of the first, of the top left bracket, being the East bracket. Maryland, the 6th seed, is going to take on Belmont or Temple, the winner of that first game. So, another thing that I think people overlook when doing a March Madness bracket, they'll see one of those first 4 games playing Maryland, and they'll just scratch it off as the higher seed winning. As, either the 6th seed, the 5 seed, or the 1 seed winning that game. Just because, it's a first 4 game. Whoever's going to win that isn't going to win the next game. That never happens. The thing is, it happens pretty much once a year ever since the first 4 was implemented. Ever since the field went from 64 to 68. And this is another pattern, history-esque pick that I like to make in all of my brackets. Pick one. Because you'll odds on, one of them will happen. So not picking one is destined to lose. Now, if you pick the wrong one, you have a chance of losing some more. But if you get that upset right, it's such a big gain that you have a very solid chance at getting a lot out of that going into the further rounds of the bracket. And I think this is very possible. I don't think Maryland's a very strong team. I think they're overseeded this year. And I think whoever wins that game between Belmont and Temple has a very legitimate chance to go and upset Maryland. Now, we're going to go ahead and move on to if you're not a local viewer, if you're not someone who's really watched a lot of Terrier Talk going into this, you probably aren't aware of why this next game is so important. But the thing is, Terrier Talk happens in Houma, Louisiana. LSU is what I like to call the purple elephant in the room in this tournament. Because down here, that's all anyone's talking about. How far do you have LSU going? What should LSU have been seeded? We should have been a 2 seed. Things like that. And the reason it's so important is, for those who aren't very aware of LSU's history in March Madness, LSU in 2009 made it as an 8 seed, won a game, then lost to the eventual champions of North Carolina. After that, LSU missed the March Madness bracket for an entire decade, from 2010 all the way to the 2018 season, for 9 straight years. A decade later, all of a sudden, through inspiration, whether it be wiretapping, whatever may have happened, through magic even, we're back, we're a great team, and we're a 3 seed. So everyone's been asking, how far is LSU going to go? Unfortunately for LSU, we are put in a pretty rough bracket, with our 2 higher seeds being 2 very accomplished blue-collar programs, and I'll talk about that when we get into the later rounds. But for the very least, for now, LSU beats Yale, I think, in that first round. I think everyone was expecting this to be Harvard. Yale ended up beating Harvard in the Ivy League championship game, but neither of those teams are really going to hold a candle to LSU. Controversy or not, suspension or not, LSU should be able to at least take care of business here. Moving on to Louisville versus Minnesota. These are 2 teams that I think are both relatively average. Of course, being that 7 and 10 seed, it's not surprising. I am going to go ahead and favor Louisville. If I recall correctly, they have a little bit of a higher free throw shooting percentage, which is always nice. It adds a little bit of consistency to that team. Whereas Minnesota's a little bit more inconsistent, I guess would be the best way to put it, which makes me want to rely on them a little bit less. Also, this is a little bit of a side note, but it's still important because you can't go off of the numbers for this year. You have to look at history and what that shows for these teams. Minnesota last year was a 5 seed, if I recall correctly, and they went on to lose to a 12 seed. And that lack of success in the tournaments before leads me to believe that they're not going to have a lot of success this year. And finally, that gives us, for the first round for this bracket, Michigan State. Michigan State's going to take care of business against Bradley. I'll talk about these 2, 3, 4 matches, games a little bit later on, specifically when I get to those upsets, because pretty much every year, despite the fact that 1 seeds almost never lose to that 16 seed, almost always one of a 2, a 3, or a 4 doesn't make it to that second round. Whether for whatever reason that may be, a 13, 14, or 15 seed tends to go on to beat that high seed team. I don't think that's going to be Michigan State this year. A few years ago, they lost to, I think it was Stephen F. Austin, or it was a team like that beat Michigan State as a 2 seed. I don't think that happens this year, though. I am going to go ahead and advance Michigan State. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the second round. I'm going to take this bracket by bracket. So I'll go east, then I'll go, I think it's south, then midwest, or west, then midwest, if I recall correctly. So, and then I'll take it round by round, and then when I'm done with all that, I'll talk about the Final Four. So, as the games go on, as the rounds go on, the games get more valuable in the points. I think it goes, depending on how you do your scale, either 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and then 32, or like 1, 3, 5, and then I think the final game is worth 80. Either way, these next rounds are going to be more important, so it's much more important to pick reliable teams that are less likely to get upset. Now, is Duke going to win the title? I can't 100% say yes. However, I think they're good to get pretty consistently at least to the Elite Eight. I don't think anyone in the 16-team mini bracket is going to contend with them, whether that be UCF, VCU, Mississippi State, Virginia Tech, or the team that I have matched up against Duke in the Sweet 16, that Cinderella story I was talking about earlier, Liberty. I think this is... Virginia Tech is not a very consistent team. They're a very good shooting team, but they've had bad nights. And if they have a bad night against Liberty, then Liberty's going to win. And I think Liberty is a scary enough team to be able to do that back-to-back. We've seen it before. Last year in the East, Loyola Chicago, of course, famously got to the Elite Eight. And I think this year we're going to see a high seed from the East again advance far. Now, is that going to be replicated in that 11 seed, whether that be Belmont or Temple? This year I don't think that'll be the case. I think it'll be the 12 seed. So I do think LSU is going to go on to beat whoever wins that game. And then Louisville versus Michigan State. Michigan State is the more reliable team, and Michigan State is going to go on to win that game, which will bring me to probably the biggest game to talk about, my biggest pick to talk about. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the Sweet 16, Duke versus Liberty. Look, Virginia Tech's somewhat inconsistent. Mississippi State's somewhat inconsistent. Duke doesn't have that same lack of consistency. Duke's going to steamroll Liberty if Liberty makes it this far, and going to advance to the Elite Eight. I would be extremely surprised if Duke didn't at least make it to the Elite Eight. We'll talk about those other games in just a little bit. Those Final Four and potential championship games in just a little bit for Duke and whoever makes it out of that Eastern Conference. And that moves us on to LSU versus Michigan State. LSU, of course, in Louisiana, going to be the team outside of Duke, probably that's going to be favored to win the most, just because of the history of it, that decade-long absence. We're finally back, and we're a 3 seed. We can actually go the distance, potentially. So, will we? I don't think so. I really don't think so. Between all the controversy that's at hand, and us having to face 2 blue-collar programs, if we are to try to make it to the Final Four, I just don't think it's going to happen. Now, I don't think this game against Michigan State is a lock for Michigan State. Like I said, Michigan State has this tendency to not be as consistent as the other blue-collar programs in college basketball, in men's college basketball specifically. But I am going to go ahead and pick them in this game to beat LSU. And that leads us to the Elite Eight matchup between Duke and Michigan State, and I'm going to pick Duke. Duke, I do think they're the more consistent team, they're the better team. Zion Williamson is just one of the best players I've ever seen play college basketball. Even coming off of an injury, he's going to be great. Michigan State is, I've said this multiple times throughout this bracket, one of the less consistent blue-collar programs, and Duke is much more consistent. I think Duke wins this game, and is going to be my first pick to be in the Final Four. So, that moves us on to the West down here. Excuse me, the South is on the other side. So, we have the West. West is going to be headed up by number 1 seed Gonzaga. They're going to play in their first round matchup, the winner of PVAMU versus FDU. I looked a little bit into those teams. I tend to discount the 16 seeds, and this is going to be one of those times. Gonzaga is going to win this game. Syracuse then takes on Baylor in the 8-9 seed. So Syracuse has this interesting history over the past few years. I think in both 2016 and 2018, they made deep runs through very low seeds, very high-numbered seeds. I think in 2016 they made it to the Final Four as a 10 seed, and then as a first four matchup participant, an 11 seed last year, they went on to make it to the Sweet 16 and even compete with number 2 seed Duke in their bracket. So Syracuse, despite not being a very high seed, is a very consistent March Madness blue-collar program. And if there's a team that's going to make some upsets in one of those lower seeds, I do think it's going to be Syracuse. I'm picking Syracuse to win this game, and we'll talk about Syracuse versus Gonzaga in just a little bit. Marquette, then, and the 5 seed is going to be taking on Murray State. I would beware, as Marquette, that Murray State, this is going to be a close game. I am, however, going to take Marquette. I do think Murray State can beat Marquette. This is not a slam dunk in the slightest, but I do think Marquette's going to go on to win the game. And then in this last little 16-team pool, Florida State takes on Vermont, and I do think Florida State wins. Florida State is a somewhat consistent team as that 4 seed, and I do like Florida State in this bracket. They're a good shooting team. There's a lot that they can do, and I like their progression as a team, and I'll talk about them in a little bit as well. Moving on, we have number 6 seed Buffalo, a team that I am much more used to being like a 13 or 14 seed, taking on 11 seed first 4 winner between Arizona State and St. John's. These are 3 teams that I don't trust in the slightest as consistent contenders, as consistent game winners. I am going to take Buffalo. Buffalo upset Arizona last year in a 4 versus 13 matchup. It was one of the first games of the tournament, and it broke most people's brackets, including mine. Last year, it was the bracket buster. Buffalo, of course, a much higher seed this year. I am going to go ahead and give it to Buffalo, whether it be Arizona State or St. John's that they take on. I do think Buffalo is going to be able to pull through and win that game. Next, we have Texas Tech, the 3 seed versus North Kentucky, the 14 seed. This is one of those games that you might want to watch out for as an upset, because, excuse me, Texas Tech is a team that tends to be in the tournament, but doesn't tend to do very well in the tournament, and I'm not going to expect much more than that from them this year. So, like that, I am going to expect Texas Tech to not go that far, and I do think it's a very good choice for an upset, even as early as that first round. However, I do think Texas Tech is going to win this game. Next, we have Nevada versus Florida. This is one of the hardest games for me to pick, because both of these teams have a lot of history of doing well in the tournament. So, I was looking at both of these teams going into Selection Sunday as being potential upset dark horse teams that can go far. We've seen Florida even this season contend with very high seed teams. Think about it, Florida's a 10 seed. We've seen them beat 3 seed LSU twice out of 3 times this season. Excuse me. And that one loss being in overtime. We've seen them compete with Tennessee. We've seen them compete with Kentucky. We've seen these very close games. And Nevada last year had that shocking comeback victory against Cincinnati as a 7 seed beating a 2 seed. So we've seen both of these teams with a lot of success in March Madness historically. So this was tough for me. I think both teams have a very good shot at winning. I am going to, however, give the game to Nevada. With a team like Florida, Florida's very inconsistent. They're either going to get blown out, or they're going to make an Elite 8 Final Four run. So it's just hoping to guess that right, really. But the thing about Florida is that they tend to play up to their competition, and they tend to play down to their competition. How else were you looking at potentially after that loss to LSU, maybe not even being in the tournament? They did end up making it, of course. But I can't trust them to win these games and to make a run with them with that lack of consistency. And finally, in the first round for the left side of the bracket, Michigan is going to take on Montana. Michigan made it to the finals last year. They have a lot of good history as a great college basketball program, and I do think they do win this game. Excuse me. Going on to the second round, I think this is probably the bracket with where the most... what's the best way to put it? I think this is the bracket that ends up with the most bracket busting. This is my prediction for the East from last year. If you recall correctly, last year the East had an absolute explosion on most brackets. It was the first time in the history of the 64-team tournament, excuse me, that that the 1 through 4 seeds all didn't make it to the Sweet 16. I'm not quite predicting that. However, I'm predicting the 8 seed as well as the 7 seed, I'll talk about that in a second, to both win their second round games. So yes, I do think Syracuse gets the win against Gonzaga. Gonzaga made it to the finals 2 years ago against North Carolina. However, Gonzaga is not the most consistent 1 seed in the world. They're very good, but they're not the most consistent team in the world. And Syracuse very consistently makes it to the Sweet 16, no matter what seed they come from. They very consistently, systematically, methodically make it to that Sweet 16 round. So I'm going to predict them to do that this year, even going through that very high overall seed, that number 1 seed, Gonzaga. Moving on, we have Marquette, a team that tends to perform well in tournaments, versus Florida State, a team that also tends to perform well in tournaments, in March Madness specifically, of course. And I'm going to go ahead and give it to Florida State. I really like this Florida State team. They're strong. They're good. They look like a team that might be able to make a run, and that is where they're going right now, in my bracket at the very least. Moving on, we have 3 seed Texas Tech taking on 6 seed Buffalo. Definitely look out for this one as a potential upset. Buffalo beating Texas Tech. Again, Texas Tech isn't a consistent team. However, I do think they're going to go ahead and make it out of their 4-team bracket, make it to the Sweet 16, and beat Buffalo to do it. And that leads us finally to Nevada versus Michigan. The 7 seed versus the 2 seed. Nevada both of these teams are in very familiar territory from last year. Both these teams were in this situation last year. Michigan making it out of that second round to get to the Final Four and even the championship game, with Nevada beating Cincinnati to get to the to the Sweet 16. And I think Nevada is going to win this game. Nevada, I think, they're not the better team, obviously. Michigan's the better team. But I really like this Nevada team to make a run. I think they're going to make a run. I see them as a very strong team that's going to do very well. That leads us to the Final Four matchups for this bracket in the Sweet 16. We have Syracuse, the 8 seed, taking on 4 seed Florida State. I think this is where Syracuse run ends. Syracuse, their consistency and their ability to win games past the Sweet 16 gets somewhat shoddy. Like I said, they can make the Sweet 16 consistently, but they cannot make past that consistently. They do it, but not consistently. And I think Florida State's the more consistent team this season. And I think they go on to make it to the Elite 8. In the 3 versus 7 matchup, Texas Tech takes on Nevada. This is where my trust in Texas Tech ends, and my trust in dark horse 7 seed Nevada to make it to the Elite 8 extends even to that Elite 8. I do think Nevada goes on to win that game. And finally, Florida State versus Nevada. This goes into a little bit of meta bracketology, I guess is the best way to put it. Again, I'm not going to be perfect. And the likelihood of Florida State versus Nevada actually happening is very small. However, even if maybe I favor Nevada in this matchup, I do think Florida State's more likely to get here, and thus I have more opportunity points later on in the rounds when maybe Nevada gets maybe beaten by Florida, who knows. I think Florida State's more likely to get here, and thus Florida State is going to go on to win this game, and they're going to be my second participant in the Final Four from the Western bracket, from the Western region. So that is the left side of my bracket. I'm going to go ahead and do one quick scroll through here just to show you one last time. My Elite Eight games from over here. Duke beats number 1 seed Duke beats number 2 seed Michigan State, and number 4 seed Florida State beats number 7 seed Nevada. If you have any questions, any comments, anything you want to add, please do so in the live chat. Okay, so we move on to the South, and Virginia's hopeful redemption versus number 16 Gardner-Webb. They do it. I guess is the most blunt way to say it. Last year, of course, they infamously lost to number 16 seed UMBC, University of Maryland, at Baltimore County. And in embarrassing fashion, they even got blown out in the second half. And this team, I think they're going to be hungry to make a run. But I've always not trusted Virginia in the tournament. Every year. Like last year, I didn't predict them to lose to UMBC. However, I predicted them to lose the next round to the winner of the Creighton-Kansas State game. They didn't even make it. I never trust Virginia to go far because they very rarely do go far in the brackets. They are not a blue-collar team. They're not a consistent March Madness performer. So despite the fact that I have them winning this game, and they will win this game, and I think they'll make it farther this year than they do in years both before this and after this, don't trust Virginia to go far. Don't trust Virginia ever as a Final Four team, in my opinion. Just between history and just how that team, how that program is formed. They're not a blue-collar team. They're not a consistent March Madness deep run team. Moving on, we have the 8 seed Ole Miss versus the 9 seed Oklahoma. I actually looked at this matchup sort of extensively. Ole Miss, both of these teams, strangely enough, despite the SEC being an extremely strong conference this year, Oklahoma has the slightly tougher strength of schedule, computer-wise at least. And I don't know how accurate that is, really, despite that. I favor Ole Miss in a few other statistics, and because of that, I do think Ole Miss does go on to win this game. Then we have the 5 seed Wisconsin versus the 12 seed Oregon. Both of these teams are very often successful teams in March Madness. Wisconsin getting the win, if I recall correctly, a few years ago against the undefeated Kentucky team, and Oregon making it to the Final Four 2 years ago, beating number 1 seed Kansas to do so. So, this is a 5-12 matchup. And I think with the nature of this being a 5-12 matchup, that favors the 12 seed when both teams are blue-collar teams. And not really blue-collar teams, but they're successful teams in March Madness. That means that 12 seed team is experienced here. They know what they're doing. And that's a very dangerous 12 seed to have to match up against. So I think Oregon does go on and win this game. Moving on, we have Kansas State, the number 4 seed versus number 13 seed, University of California, Irvine, UC Irvine. UC Irvine has pretty much no prior success, history of success in March Madness. Kansas State does, if I recall correctly. They made it through that disastrous bracket last year to make it to the Final Four from the Eastern region. And I do think they go on to win this game. Then we have number 6 seed Villanova versus number 11 seed St. Mary. St. Mary tends to have, they tend to win a game in March Madness. They tend to have some success. Villanova is not used to being this low of a seed. They're the defending champions, but they won that championship, from the 1 seed, not from the 6 seed. And I don't expect them to make a huge run this year. However, I do think they win this game. I do think Villanova goes on to win this game. I guess I'll talk about Villanova a little bit more in just a second. However, more important to talk about right now is the number 3 seed versus number 14 seed, Purdue versus Old Dominion. So, I was talking about this a little bit earlier, but this is the important time to talk about it because this is where I make that decision. One of a 2 seed, 3 seed, or 4 seed, 2 seed, 3 seed, or 4 seed, goes on to lose their first round match pretty much every year. And trying to pick that is like trying to find a needle in a haystack, like a lot of this is. But I do like Purdue to be that team to lose to Old Dominion. Old Dominion doesn't have that much success in March Madness, but neither does Purdue. Purdue's been a decent seed before. They tend to be a 6 seed, 7 seed, 8 seed, maybe a 5 seed in that range. So they're not used to being this high of a seed. So I think with that lack of experience in being favored in a lot of games comes the ability for Old Dominion to go up and snatch that game from Purdue's hands. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this will blow flat in my face. But maybe I'll be right. And that's sort of the fun of March Madness. It's not fun to pick all of the lower seeds all the time. Old Dominion hopefully will, for my sake at the very least, go on to beat Purdue. And then in the last group of 4, Cincinnati versus Iowa. Cincinnati has a little bit more success in March Madness throughout the years. Of course, not last year, but they were a 2 seed. They tend to be a little bit of a better program. They're a little bit more of a famous program. Neither program is famous, but Cincinnati has a little bit more success in years past. I'm going to go ahead and give the game to Cincinnati. And then finally, Tennessee versus Colgate. I just talked about how one of a 2, 3, or 4 seed is going to lose. I just talked about that 1, 3 seed that I think is going to lose. So I don't think it's going to be Tennessee. Tennessee is going to beat Colgate. Excuse me. Moving on to the second round, Virginia takes on Ole Miss. I do think they beat Ole Miss. Ole Miss just isn't the same caliber of team, and Virginia is still hungry to avenge that last year's loss. Tried to get that redemption. I do think they win that game. Oregon, the 12 seed, is a dangerous 12 seed, taking on 4 seed Kansas State. However, I don't think they win this game. I think Kansas State wins this game. Again, they made it to the Final Four last year, and I think they'll have some success this year, making it to the Sweet 16. Villanova, the 6th seed, takes on Old Dominion, and Old Dominion isn't going to have the same success against Purdue that they do against Villanova. Villanova, they've won 2 titles in the last 3 years, and I don't see them having failure this year. It'd be interesting to see a 6 versus 3 matchup here between Villanova and Purdue. This is just a little bit of an asterisk. This isn't in my bracket, but in a lot of people's brackets, you'll see that 6 seed matchup between Villanova and Purdue. And I think it's interesting to look at, because you see Villanova versus Purdue, and you're going to expect Villanova to be the higher seed, just like blind going into March Madness. That wouldn't be the case. Purdue would be the higher seed, but I think Villanova would still be picked in a lot of those games. That being said, Villanova, I do think, wins this game, whether it be versus Old Dominion or versus Purdue. And then we get Tennessee versus Cincinnati. I don't think Cincinnati does to Tennessee what Nevada did to Cincinnati last year. I think Tennessee does win. Going on to the Sweet 16. Excuse me. Virginia versus Kansas State. Virginia does... I think Virginia wins. This is where my trust in Virginia begins to end. Like I said, I would never trust them to be one of my Final Four teams. This is no exception. Despite all of the redemption, all of the revenge from last year, this is not going to be that year. However, I don't think I can trust Kansas State with that torch either. I think Virginia is going to go on to win this game, and I think Virginia is more likely, at the very least, to make it to the Elite Eight than Kansas State is. Then we have Villanova versus Tennessee. Villanova in its seed, in that 6th seed, just inherently brings up very interesting matchups. I talked about the theoretical matchup versus Purdue in the last round, and this matchup against Tennessee that I actually have on my bracket is also very interesting because of Villanova's seed. Villanova you expect to be a 1 seed or a 2 seed, but they're a 6 seed. And I think Villanova is going to be a popular pick to make it out of the Sweet 16 and even Elite 8 against Virginia to make it to the Final Four. because they're in a bracket full of teams that don't have a lot of March Madness success. Tennessee, not a lot of success, the 2 seed. Purdue, not a lot of success, the 3 seed. Kansas State, not really much of a blue-collar program, despite their success, the 4 seed. And of course, Virginia, as I've talked about extensively, that 1 seed. So, I think Villanova is going to be a very interesting lower seed pick to make it to the Final Four. However, I don't think they do it. Tennessee is the stronger team. Tennessee is the more consistent team. Tennessee is the better team. And I think in the Sweet 16, that is going to finally come into play for Villanova. Even if they face Purdue in the second round, rather than Old Dominion, I don't think that will stop Villanova. But Tennessee is a better team than Purdue, a much better team than Purdue. They had the number 1 ranking for a couple of weeks throughout this year. They are the number 1 overall ranking. This team is incredibly good, with very few losses throughout the season. They're a 2 seed for a reason, and because of that, Tennessee is going to go on to win this game, and even go on to win their Elite 8 matchup. I was alluding to this the entire time going through this bracket. I don't trust Virginia when it comes to getting to the Final Four. They don't do it nearly as often as they really should as the program that they are. They're a great team, but they are not going to make it this far. They're not going to make it to the Final Four, despite the despite the revenge, despite the redemption story. Tennessee is my pick to make it to the Final Four from the South. Finally, that leads us to the Midwest bracket. We have, starting off in the first round, we have number 1 seed UNC taking on number 16 seed Iona. UNC wins. They're 1 seed, not much to talk about there. There's a lot to talk about between Utah State and Washington. Both of these teams I don't think are very strong. I think they're both a little bit overseeded, to be honest. I don't trust either of them in this game, and I guess not much of a surprise when I say that whoever wins this game is going to lose to UNC, so really only 1 point at stake here. I'm going to go ahead and pick Utah State. Not much of a reason why, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later on. Not much of a reason why, just more they're the slightly higher seed. Neither of these teams look very interesting, especially running into that wall of a 1 seed UNC. UNC is one of the most consistent teams in the entire bracket, up there with Duke and Kansas. And we'll talk about Kansas in just a second. And they have they won it 2 years ago. They made it to the Final Four last year, if I recall correctly. Unless I'm missing something. They won it 2 years ago. They made it to the final game the year before that. They're an extremely trustworthy pick, a very reliable pick, and a very high statistics pick to go far in this bracket. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Utah State, but I think that's really only a 1 point swing, whoever wins that game. Moving on, Auburn versus New Mexico State. Auburn is not a team that tended for a long time to have a lot of success or a lot of history even in March Madness. They weren't really much of a basketball school until last year. Then they were a 6 seed. They had a lot of success. They were ranked pretty highly for a lot of the year. They fell off the rails a little bit to finish the year. They were a 6 seed, and they won 1 game and exited the tournament. So I think this is a very interesting pick as a 12-5 upset. However, I do think Auburn goes on to win this game. Kansas, I am sorry, NO East. It's Kansas. Kansas, like I said, Duke, UNC, and Kansas are probably the 3 most consistent March Madness schools in the entire bracket, in the entire country. And it's a really, really bad pull to get Kansas as a 4 seed. That's kind of rude to a team with as little bracket experience as NO East, whoever that may be. So yes, Kansas does go on to win that game. Iowa State versus Ohio State. I pick Ohio State in this matchup for almost the sole reason of this was one of the last picks I made in this bracket. I made this retroactively because, I guess a little bit of a spoiler alert, there aren't going to be very many upsets in this bracket, and that pretty much never happens. You never have, like, 0 upsets in a bracket. You'll have brackets, like, when I say bracket, I mean, like, regional brackets. You'll have regional brackets with few upsets, 2, 3, along those lines, but 0 is not a number that ever happens. So I do think Ohio State, I'll go ahead and pick them to beat Iowa State. I think it's possible, an 11-6 matchup, of course, and I think Ohio State is going to win. Houston versus Georgia State. Houston has some success. Of course, they have the famous game 30 years ago in March Madness, but outside of that, they tend to have some success in March Madness. I do think they win this game as a 3 seed. Wofford versus Seton Hall. I'm going to tell the story of how I picked Wofford versus Seton Hall in my conclusion, but just for right now, Wofford wins this game. And then finally, Kentucky versus Abilene Christian University, I think. Kentucky wins. It's a 2 versus 15 with Kentucky. If you had to list like 5 blue-collar colleges in college basketball, it would probably be Duke, Villanova, North Carolina, Kansas, and then Kentucky. And unfortunately for the Midwest, they get 3 of those in one bracket. That is very sad. Moving on to the second round, UNC beats Utah State or Washington, whoever that may be. Auburn just doesn't have the same history that Kansas does. I think Kansas wins this game, which leads to a very, very intriguing 1 versus 4 matchup between UNC and Kansas. I'll talk about that in just a second. Ohio State versus Houston. I'm going to throw a Cinderella in there. I think Ohio State makes a run. I think Ohio State makes it to the Sweet 16. Again, this is more for the... my bracket looked too neat beforehand. Not that much going into this. Ohio State is a pretty big program. Not as much in basketball as it is in football, but in basketball, they tend to have success. They tend to be a higher seed than they are this year. So maybe they will have some success with that. And then finally, Wofford versus Kentucky. Kentucky's going to win this game because it's Kentucky. Moving on to the Sweet 16. So in the Sweet 16, we have one of the most interesting matchups in a Sweet 16 match we've ever really had. And I do think this will happen. I don't really see much competition from whether it be Auburn or Utah State or whoever from these other teams in that top half of the Midwest bracket. I think UNC versus Kansas as a 1-4 game is going to happen. Excuse me. And it's going to be great. I think it'll be a really good game. These are 2 of the biggest programs in the entire nation, and I think it'll be very fun to watch. Kansas is, of course, consistently great, and UNC is very much the same. However, I think it'll be closer than maybe a 1-4 game will look at first, but I do think UNC wins. And then finally, in the Sweet 16, I have Ohio State versus Kentucky. Ohio State, I just didn't like Houston or Iowa State as the 3 or 6 seed, making it very far. I don't think whoever makes it out of that 4-team bracket stands a chance versus Kentucky as the 2 seed. And finally, in the Elite 8, we have UNC versus Kentucky. This happened 2 years ago, and I do think it'll be the same result. I don't think it'll be a very good game, but I pick UNC to be my final member of the Final Four, which means in the Final Four I am predicting 3 ACC teams, 1 ACC team, 2 1 seeds, a 2 seed, and a 4 seed. So why that breakdown? There is history that goes into this. In the history of the bracket, the Final Four tends to be some combination of this. You'll have always 2 1 seeds. 2 1 seeds are going to make it out of their bracket pretty much all the time. You're going to have a 1 or a 2 seed in that 3rd slot, and then you'll have a non-1 or 2 seed in that last slot. Whether that be a 3 seed, a 4 seed, or some crazy 10 seed Syracuse, 11 seed VCU, 7 seed UConn, 7 seed South Carolina, 8 seed Kansas State, whoever. That's just some examples from previous years. And I think this year that's going to be the slightly more obvious 4 seed Florida State. Last year we had a slight derivation from this. We had 2 1 seeds in Kansas, in Villanova, and then we had 3 seed Michigan and 8 seed Kansas State, but still very similar. So I think it'll be 1 seed Duke, 4 seed Florida, 2 seed Tennessee, and 1 seed UNC. And how do I think those games will go? I think number 1 seed Duke is going to beat number 4 seed Florida State. I think Duke, again, they're the better team. They're the strongest team in this bracket in the nation, regardless of any injury notice. I think Duke wins this game. And then Tennessee versus North Carolina. Both teams are really good. Both teams have been at the top throughout this year. However, UNC, in my opinion, is just a little bit more consistent, and it is a little bit more of a safe pick to make it to the championship game. Duke versus UNC, probably the most common championship game throughout this year, throughout this bracket, and I'm going to go ahead and pick it as well. And my pick for the champion is going to be the number 1 overall seed of March Madness, Duke. Duke is my winner, and I think the final score is going to be 67-65. I think it'll be a great game, and I expect Duke to win. Those are my picks. That is my thought process. So there's one final lesson I want anyone who's watching this for educational value to take away from this video. We're nearing an hour. I apologize. I wanted to be a little bit more brief than this, but it is what it is. And that goes back to Wofford versus Seton Hall. I hope I've convinced you at this point that I tend to make my picks through statistical analysis and history and looking at the numbers as much as I can. So keep that in mind, keep that context in mind when I explain why I picked Wofford versus Seton Hall the way I did, and my thought process for it. I don't know much about either of these teams. The reason I picked Wofford is because, it's going to sound stupid, but let me explain, they're the Terriers. Of course, we're the Vanderbilt Terriers. There's a little bit of, it's just the same mascot. It's cool. But it's just a hunch. There's nothing behind it. There's no statistical analysis. There's no history. Seton Hall is a slightly better historical school, but there's not that much there. There's no legitimate reason for me to pick Wofford, so I have an illegitimate reason. And why is this important? Because I think it accentuates the most important parts of March Madness, and that is, one, to make your picks while having fun. Having fun is the most important part of this. Don't take it too seriously, because this is part of my second point. Have fun when you're doing this. The point of it's to have fun. You're not going to get a perfect bracket. Go make picks because it's fun. Make those upset picks because it's fun. Make illogical picks. UMBC beating Virginia last year was not a logical pick. It was a fun pick. And when people made the pick, it was very fun to make. Loyola Chicago making it to the Elite Eight wasn't fun. It was fun, excuse me. It wasn't logical, but it was fun to watch. And it was fun to make those picks. It's fun to theorize about an 11-seed Ohio State. Impractically and against all odds, making it to the Sweet 16 against better teams like number 6 seed Iowa State and number 3 seed Houston, like you see on your screen. It's just fun to watch. It's fun to make those picks. And the second point is, with those picks being made, you're not going to be perfect, and the statistical analysis isn't always the most accurate thing. Even the historical analysis, which is something I brought up a lot throughout this video, is not the most accurate thing to go by. So sometimes, just go with your gut. If you look at, whatever game, and you think, a lot of people are picking Team A, but I just have this weird feeling that Team B is going to win. Go pick Team B. Go pick that upset. Go make that pick that'll make or break your bracket. And have fun watching that game. Put importance into that game. Put stock into that game. And go watch it. Because it's fun. That's what the point of this is. Go have fun, make a bracket, and watch it get destroyed. Because it's part of the fun of it. Don't put too much stock into these games. Don't take any one game too seriously. Just watch the games and have fun. That'll be it for my video, Finally, I'll go ahead and look at my Final Four. Duke, Florida State, Tennessee, and UNC. I have Duke as my champion. And I hope you enjoyed this video, as long as it may have been the 5 people who are here with me right now. Thank you for sticking it through. And I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And I will see you guys next time, next Sunday, for another episode of Terrier Talk. I will see you later.